So this is a video that I want to make about debating against Afro-Pessimism. So I think that this isn't really going to cover authors because there are a lot of different ways to respond to Afro-Pessimism, and most of the times my suggestions will be more dependent on the author literature base that like you're reading from or that you're using to respond to it. But I think there are a lot of good responses, and I want this video to more so try to give advice for arguments across the spectrum and different ways that you can think about the parts of Afro-Pessimism and how you should interact with them regardless of what type of argument that you're reading. And in general, I think drawing tensions between different ways teams read pessimism can be like really effective for like anyone trying to draw attention between the way they set up like their link arguments, the standards that they have for like app solvency versus like alt solvency, what the alt does. And I think a lot of it is really just a question of being able to concretize what the other team is defending and then being able to find strategic ways to like create advantages based off of what they're defending. So this video won't have a lot of stuff about me suggesting like authors and stuff. I think that giving a like list of authors I would read is a bit hard because like once again I think all of that is really contextual to like Afro-Pessimism as both the literature and also like depending on the literature that you're trying to use and like what your overall kind of perspective is on like how you're going about the debate as a whole. To kind of like start off, I want to start talking about framework. And so I think that framework is like really important in a place where I think not a lot of people spend enough time on earlier on in the debate. I think you should make a convincing argument here, even if you don't think it's where a lot of your offense lies, because it's always the way that people are going to frame your offense. I think like the framework argument does a couple of things for different people. I think that it can allow you to make a standard that you think that the AF has to hold versus the alternative, a way that the judge can evaluate the two. It can help you with foreshadowing future impact framing arguments that you want to make in terms of thinking about how those impact framing arguments can interact with what types of things the judge should be evaluating as like what the ballot resolves and what the question of the ballot resolves. And I also think that it can do a good job of raising like the standard of like the type of link articulation the other team needs to make. So if you can make arguments that are about why understanding the method or the plain text or etc. in a vacuum, it forces the other team to read link arguments that are a lot more limited compared to what they might be more comfortable with, and it can help you weigh your offense more effectively a lot better like in the debate once you get into like the other parts I'll be talking about. I also think for teams that are reading critical arguments against pessimism, that it can really help force a strong like method v method debate and all versus af debate, where you get to weigh maybe a lot of the material emphasis or the material outcomes of the praxis of whatever your argument you're reading, which can be really helpful when trying to figure out and trying to put pressure on the other team to be able to give like an alternative that's like comparable in terms of solvency. So at like a thesis level, I think that in terms of the kind of like thesis ontology reform debate, kind of like just trying to disprove the thesis of the criticism from whatever perspective, I think this is where people can often get the most repetitive, especially with the evidence that they read. I think sometimes like people basically end up reading a lot of evidence that says a lot of the same things and makes a lot of the same claims, and that doesn't allow them to make a diversity of offense. And I think having really diverse and nuanced angles against teams like this can be really, really helpful, because I think that a lot of times you can shift the debate into a set of examples or a set of ways of thinking about theory that are really advantageous for you, and you're forcing the other team to kind of debate on your terms and think through the debate through the language that you're kind of like using to frame the rest of the debate, which I think is like a good place to start in terms of creating like an offensive strategy against pessimism. I don't think that you need to necessarily disagree with the totality of pessimism to get like positive offense out of like this portion of the flow, because I think that different pessimists think different things about what the resolution to violence that they offer is. And I think generally that you need to win arguments about why the 1AC is able to move closer to a solution that the alternative would be in tune with, rather than I think winning a total type of like basically offensive strategy that attempts to fully disprove the entirety of the thesis. I think if you really do have a good nuanced angle against this and you think it could be really good for your strategy as a whole, and you think maybe that you can beat the other team on just an examples debate that focuses on why the specific process that you're undertaking are good, then I think that that can be really advantageous in terms of like really beating the thesis level of the argument. I think at that level you can really put a big hole in the other team. But I think in a world where the other team is really strong on their level or thesis, it's really a question of being able to create the clearest examples, because those are what's always going to win the debate, and creating examples that are more relevant to what your AF does is kind of like a more rewarding strategy than I think trying to just create examples broadly that defend the idea that the world itself is repairable. I think the more your examples get closer to your affirmative, the more weight you can get out of them, and the more you can start spinning them into ways that you can think about the permutation and like link turn strategies and other parts of the debate that I'll kind of go on to talk about. And in general, I think that the thesis kind of portion of debate is a place where you should be putting time in tandem and making it like coherent with the rest of your strategy in such a way that you think about like what your strategy does in order to be able to win, what you need to be able to win, either like a permutation or a reason that the av outweighs and solves better. And I think that thinking about the way that like how much offense you put on that portion of the flow connects to like the way that you get to that overall goal is like really how you want to be thinking about the way that you disperse your time there. I think at the level of the link arguments, this is where I feel like a lot of teams are the weakest in terms of like their general approach. I think that generally it's really much better to get into like the evidence of the other team and doing overall evidence comparison, even if you don't have evidence that's like comparable to being able to resolve the link arguments that the negative team is making. I think generally being able to like spend time in the 2AC and early on in the debate really reading their evidence and pulling lines from their evidence or explaining why your AF doesn't link to parts of their evidence can be really helpful in trying to win that link arguments that they're winning are more generic and about the status quo than they are about the AF. And I think trying to push more on the question of the uniqueness of the link arguments through this types of like evidence analysis can be really, really helpful. I think sometimes it's better to just go all in on like them being wrong about the outcome of the link argument, even if the thesis of the link argument is true. So like being able to win, like there's a possibility that the 1AC requires like the usage of like X or Y anti-black system, but that the outcome of the usage of that system does something positive in terms of like helping to affect like the immediate concerns of like anti-blackness or winning, that your impact argument kind of creates a tension in terms of like how anti-black violence goes down. I think being able to apply the permutation in ways that give both the permutation and your arguments in terms of the link turns can be really useful here, because I think that sometimes teams like kind of like brush over saying that permutation is able to solve the link argument without really doing the work of being able to like further explain the permutation and give examples and texture to it in such a way that not only the link turns make more sense, but the permutation seems to resolve and be a much cleaner part of the debate to settle through. I think like Afro-Pessimism debates can be really, really hard in a way in which they can get like really, really messy, and like offense kind of like ends up all over the place, and like teams can kind of make link arguments anywhere. But I think that the permutation, being able to apply it neatly to different portions of the debate and showing how it resolves different portions of the debate can be a way to really clean up a lot of different portions of this. And I'll kind of go on and talk about the permutation in the next part of this video, because I want to split into two parts like I did the other Afro-Pessimism video. But overall in this video, I think what's really important is to think about that starting with your approach to being able to just make the debate clear through like clear framework arguments that allow you to figure out how the judge should be evaluating and weighing and thinking about certain parts of the flow is particularly important, and highlighting the part of the flow where you think that you can create an advantage for yourself, while also thinking about that same type of decision making process, how you decide how much offense or defense you put on like the thesis level of Afro-Pessimism. I think that making sure that you're not repetitive and you have a diversity of arguments that can really win you positive outcomes in terms of being able to win, that even if the kind of like core thesis values of the criticism are true, there are necessary outcomes that come from the 1AC that are good, that kind of outweigh or can work in tandem with whatever the 1AC is doing. And the last thing that I'll say for the link arguments is that I think you should always try to force the alternative to resolve the link arguments. You should always try to ask the question of how does the alternative able to resolve all these criticisms that they're raising, because I think forcing the negative team to defend an alternative that's like really that's really clear and concise can be advantageous for you in terms of making you neat offense about why the alternative can't spill up to solve any of the things that they're critiquing, or B, why the link arguments aren't in tension with like the types of solutions that the alternative would give. Hopefully this video was helpful, and you'll tune in for part 2 of this video.